thing. But we are live. We're gonna same thing we always about natural law and city. Uh, how was the volume on that? It's way quiet. I have it too. Doo-doo-doo. That looks like a good balance. Oh. And you know what? And some alcohol as well. Be as you tend. So I can have access to this page. So it's not a very long chapter. I guess stick around for Daggerfall, because I haven't played that in a bit. Love me some Daggerfall. Looks like part 2 is quite long. Yo, Raimundo, how's it going? I'm just pouring a drink. Only the one drink for now, though. We're on to natural law. Section 1. Natural law and reason. Also, this time we'll have Murray Rothbard actually writing. Blended Scotch whiskey. Ballantines? I'm not actually sure which GINE that is. I know the Ballantines, though. Yeah, leave this to my taste. Quite good. Easy. Also, not terribly expensive. I should, bing, 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 wahoo. Then, so that the text is legible on screen. I never know what size people view. Among intellectuals who consider themselves scientific, the phrase, the nature of man, is apt to have the effect of a red flag on a bull. Man has no nature. Modern rallying cry, and typical of the sentiment of political philosophers today. Typical of the sentiment of political philosophers today was the assertion of a distinguished political theorist some years ago before a meeting of the American Political Science Association that man's nature is a purely theological concept, must be dismissed from any scientific discussion. Box one's not that cheap here. Telling guys. Box one's not that cheap, and you get a bottle of whiskey and some Coke, and it goes quite a long way. But also, I'm not not poor. I'm not like rich, but do I have any conspicuous displays of wealth that I can show? Not really. Drawing tablet, I guess that's the most. I have a VR headset that I can't quite move frame because it's over there. Anyway, in the controversy over man's nature and over the broader and more controversial concept of natural law, both sides have repeatedly proclaimed that natural law and theology are inextricably intertwined. I am middle class, and as I am not a Marxist, I do believe. Uh, I think any class definition is nebulous. Like, I mean, working class makes sense as a category, as in like, oh, I work for an employer, but it doesn't mean anything. I'm not like less of a working person than like a small owner, and my identity is not wrapped up in that. I'm I, I'm not in a tough enough spot that the fact that I have to work is a problem. I could just not work. That's what it means to be middle class, I think. Yeah, I could just quit, I'd be fine. I wouldn't need to worry. I need a job eventually. I work because I want to have a job and not because I need the money. I wouldn't work for free, but fine. Good. Anyway, both sides have repeatedly proclaimed that natural law and theology are inextricably intertwined. As a result, many champions of natural law, scientific or philosophic circles, have gravely weakened their case by implying that rational philosophical methods alone cannot establish such law, that theological faith is necessary to maintain the concept. On the other hand, the opponents of natural law have gleefully agreed, since faith in the natural is necessary to belief in natural law, the latter concept must be tossed out of scientific secular discourse and be consigned to the arcane sphere of divine study. I very rarely hear religious people arguing that natural law can only come from religion. I guess maybe it's a Protestant thing. I don't listen to Protestants now. But like, arguments for God often follow from the existence of natural law. So it would be absurd to infer that natural law can only be discovered in relation to God. Like there's a link between, but it's not. In consequence, the idea of a natural law founded on reason and rational inquiry has been virtually lost. It depends what's meant by founded. By the idea being founded? The idea founded, or is the natural law founded? If the idea is founded, I kind of agree, but if the natural law is founded on the reason and rationality, I don't think that's quite right. Like, I think it's a thing that just is, but we discover it through reason and rational inquiry. In the same way that, like, logical axiom discover through reason and rational inquiry, like mathematical truth, etc. The believer in a rationally established natural law must then face the hostility of both camps, the one group sensing in this position an antagonism toward religion, and the other group suspecting that God and mysticism are being slipped in by the back door. The first group, it must be said that they are reflecting an extreme Augustinian position, held that faith, rather than the only legitimate for investigating man's nature and man's proper ends. In short, in this fideist tradition, theology had completely displaced philosophy. The Thomist tradition, on the contrary, precisely the opposite, vindicating the independence of philosophy from theology and proclaiming the ability of man's reason to understand and arrive at the laws, physical and ethical, of the natural order. Okay, good. Yeah. I mostly deal with people in the sort of Thomistic circles when talking about philosophy. When talking about theology and like more, not quite exactly the same. If belief in a systematic order of natural laws open to discovery by man's reason per se anti-religious, then anti-religious so were St. Thomas and the later scholastics, as well as the devout Protestant jurist Hugo Grotius. The statement that there is an order of natural law, in short, leaves open the problem of whether or not God has created that order, and the assertion of the viability of man's reason to discover the natural order leaves open the question of whether or not that reason was given to man by God. The assertion of an order of natural law discoverable by reason by itself neither pro nor anti-religious. Because this position is startling to most people, let us investigate this to further. Am I being targeted here? With like, oh man, this is the book for you. Let's get into Thomism. Quick detour. Yeah, statement of absolute independence, natural from the question of the existence of God was implicit rather than flatly asserted. Saint Thomas himself, but like so many implications of them, it was forth by Suarez and other brilliant Spanish scholastics of the late 16th. Jesuit Suarez pointed out that many scholastics had taken the position that the natural ethics, law of what is good and bad for man, does not depend on God's will. Indeed, some scholastics had gone so far as to say that, even though God did not exist, or did not make of, did not judge rightly of things, if there is in man such a dictate of right reason to guide him, would have had the same nature of law as it now has. Hypothetical. Funny sign, even though hypothetical. Or as a modern Thomist philosopher says, if the word natural means anything at all, it refers to the nature of a man, and when used with law, natural must refer to an ordering that is manifested in the of a man's nature and to nothing else. Hence, taken in itself, there is nothing religious or theological in natural law of Aquinas. I don't care about the other angle of this, where it's like, oh, defending natural law from the irreligious. I mean, it's relevant, but this is. I kind of entirely understand. I'm on both sides of this. Dutch Protestant jurist Hugo Grotius declared in his De leur belli ac pacis, what we have been saying would have a degree of validity even if we should conceive that which cannot be conceived without the utmost wickedness that there is. And again, measureless as is the power of God, nevertheless it can be said that there are certain things over which that power does not extend. Just as even God cannot cause that 2 times 2 should not make 4, so he cannot cause that which is not evil. Uh, their entraves, wolves. I don't know. It's not near cute. It's the other one. You know, cute goes uh a mirrored. Grotius's definition of natural law has nothing revolutionary. He maintains that natural law is that body of rules man is able to discover by the use of it. He does nothing but restate the scholastic notion of a rational foundation of ethics. Indeed, his aim is rather to restore that notion which had been shaken by the extreme Augustinianism of certain Protestant currents of thought. And he declares that these rules are valid in themselves in of the fact that God will. He repeats an assertion had already been made by some of the. This sounds fun, but I don't want to get into like religious texts on stream. Grotius's Deontraves adds was to construct a system of laws which would carry conviction in an age in which theological controversy gradually lost power to do. Grotius and his juristic successors, Pufendorf, Burlamaqui, and Bertel, still a lineup of names, proceeded to elaborate this independent body of natural in a purely secular context in accordance with their own particular interests, but not in contrast to this primarily theological. Indeed, even the 18th century rationalists, in many ways dedicated enemies of scholastic, profoundly influenced their very rationalism by the scholastic tradition. Thus, let there be no mistake, in the Thomistic tradition, natural, ethical, as well as physical, and the instrument by which man apprehends such law, reason, not faith or grace, revelation, or anything else. In the contemporary atmosphere, sharp dichotomy between natural law and reason, especially amid the rationalist conservative, this cannot be underscored too often. Hence, St. Thomas Aquinas, words of the historian of philosophy, Father Copelstone, emphasized the place and function of reason. He shared with Aristotle the view that it is the possession of reason distinguished man from the animals, and which enables him to act deliberately in view of the consciously apprehended end, and raises him above the level of purely instinctive behavior. Michael Knowles talks about this. He's always going on, subjugation of the animal will. Aquinas then realized that men always act purposively. Also went beyond this to argue that ends can also be apprehended by reason as either objectively good or bad for man. For Aquinas, then, in the words of Copleston, there is therefore room for the concept of right reason, reason directing man's acts to the attainment of the objective good form. Moral conduct is therefore conduct in accord with right reason. If it is said that moral conduct is rational, what is meant is that it is conduct in accordance with right reason, reason apprehending the objective good for man and dictating the means of attainment. W. Love that we're getting Aquinas in here. Not who I was expecting to see. In natural law philosophy, then, reason is not bound, as it is in modern post-human philosophy, a mere slave to the passion, confined to cranking out the discovery of the arbitrarily chosen end. For the ends themselves are selected by the use of, and right reason dictates to man his proper end, as well as the means for their attainment. The Thomist or natural law theory. General law of morality for man is a special case of the system of natural law governing all entities, each with its own nature and its own. For him, the moral law is a special case of the general that all finite things move their ends by the development of their potentialities. And here we have come to a vital difference, inanimate or even non-human creatures and man himself. Former are compelled to proceed in accordance with by their nature, whereas man, the rational animal, possesses reason to discover such ends and the will to. Which doctrine, natural law, or those of its critics, is to be considered truly rational, answered incisively by the late Leo Strauss, also a penetrating critique of the value relativism theory, Professor Arnold Brecht. For, in contrast to natural law, positivistic social science is characterized by the abandonment or the flight from reason. According to the positivistic interpretation of relativism, which prevails in present-day social science, reason can tell us which means are conducive to which ends, cannot tell us which attainable ends are to be preferred other attainable ends. Reason cannot tell us that we ought attainable ends. If someone loves, desires the impossible, reason may tell him that he acts irrationally, but it cannot tell him that he ought to act rationally, that acting irrationally is acting badly or basely. If rational conduct consists in right means, right end, relativism teaches in effect that rational conduct is scathing. Finally, the unique place of reason in natural law philosophy has been affirmed by the modern philosopher, the late Father John Toohey. That name in a while. I think Council of Trent, not the actual council, but the YouTuber, talks about Toohey a fair bit. Toohey defined sound philosophy as follows: philosophy, in the sense in which the word is used in scholasticism, contrasted with other philosophy, is an attempt on the part of man's unaided reason to give a fundamental explanation of the nature of. But natural law as science before GTA 6. I don't know why I said that. That was stupid. Also, let's get a weapon. I don't have a weapon yet, so I'm venturing unarmed, and I should not be. The Frostbane, the Ice Steel Sword of Cold. Ice Steel. How does that work? Also, it's Sniffer. Why is there Sniffer and then... Oh... I do like Sniffer, though. He's a good boy. The Frostbane. It is indeed puzzling that so many modern philosophers should sniff at the very term nature as an injection of myth and the supernatural. Apple let fall, drop to the ground, this we all observe and be in the nature of the apple, as well as the world in general. Two atoms of hydrogen combined with one of oxygen yield one molecule of water, behavior that is unique in the nature of hydrogen, oxygen, and water. There is nothing arcane or mystical about such observations. Why then, Cavill?
Cavill.
Cavill. Is that where cavalcade comes from? Uh, from cavalry. Neat. Okay. Why then cavil at the concept of nature? The world, in fact, consists of a myriad number, observable things or entities. This is surely an observable fact. The world does not consist of one homogeneous thing or it follows that each one of these different things possesses differing attributes. Otherwise, they would all be the same thing. But if A, B, C, etc. have different attributes, it follows immediately that they have different natures. It also follows that when these various things meet, a specifically delimitable and definable result will occur. In short, specific delimitable causes will have specific delimitable effects. The observable behavior of each of these entities, or of their nature, and this law includes what happens as a result of the interaction. The, the complex that we may build up of these laws may be termed the structure of natural law. What is mystical about that? In the field of purely physical law, this concept will differ from modern positivistic terminology only on high philosophical levels. Applied to man, however, the concept is far more controversial. And yet, if apples and stones and roses each have their specific natures, man the only entity, the only being that cannot have one? If man does have a nature, why can it too be open? Why cannot it be open to rational observation and reflection? If all things have natures, surely man's nature is open to the current brusque rejection of the concept of the nature of man, therefore arbitrary and a priori. One common flip criticism by opponents of natural law is, who is to establish the alleged truths about man? The answer is not who, but what. Man's reason. Man's reason is objective, i.e., it can be employed by all men to yield truths about the world. Ask what is man's nature? Write the answer. Go thou and study and find out. It is as if one man were to assert the nature of copper were open to rational investigation. A critic were to challenge him to prove this immediately by setting forth on the spot all the laws that have been discovered about copper. Another common charge is that natural law theorists differ among themselves, and that therefore all natural law theories must be discarded. This charge comes in peculiar ill grace when it comes, as it often does, from utilitarian economists. For economics has been a notoriously contentious science. Birds, man. And yet few people advocate tossing all economics, therefore, into the discard. Furthermore, difference of opinion is no excuse for discarding all sides to a dispute. A responsible person is the one who uses his reason to examine the various contentions and make up his own mind. He does not simply say a priori, a plague on all your houses. The fact of man's reason does not mean that error is impossible. Even such hard sciences, physics and chemistry, had their errors and their fervent disputes. No man is omniscient, infallible, a law, by the way, of man's nature. The natural law ethic decrees that for all living things, goodness, the fulfillment of what is best for that type of creature. Goodness is therefore relative to the nature of the creature. Thus, Professor Cropsey writes, the classical natural law doctrine is that each thing is excellent to the degree, in the degree to which it can do the things for which it is naturally equipped. Why is the natural good? Because there is neither a way nor a reason to prevent ourselves from distinguishing between useless and serviceable beasts, for example, and most empirical and rational standard of serviceable. Or the limit of the thing's activity, set by its nature. Do not judge elephants to be good because they are natural, because nature is good, whatever that would mean. Judge a particular elephant to be good by the light of what elephant nature makes it possible for elephants to do and to be. Ooh! I've heard that take before, but it's nice reading it again, and it sort of hits different in this context. Drink number 2. I'm bored. I'm bored of not drinking. I'm tense because work was pain. The pong. Or chocolate. I can go for chocolate. Yeah, I hope you guys are liking this. It is dense. In the case of man, the natural law ethic states that goodness or badness can be determined by what fulfills or thwarts what is best for man's. The natural law then elucidates what is best for man, what ends man should pursue, that are most harmonious with, best tend to fulfill his nature. In a significant sense, then, natural law provides man with a science of happiness, with the paths which is real happiness. In contrast, praxeology or economics, as well as the utilitarian philosophy, with which this science has been closely allied, treat happiness in the purely formal sense as fulfillment of those ends which will happen for whatever reason, place high on their scales of value. Satisfactions of those ends yields up to man his utility, satisfaction, happiness. Value in the sense of valuation or utility is purely subjective and decided by each individual. This procedure is perfectly proper for the formal science of praxeology, economic theory, but not necessarily elsewhere. For, in natural law ethics, ends are demonstrated to be good or bad for man in varying degrees, Value here is objective, determined by the natural law of man's being, and here happiness for man is considered in the commonsensical consensual. As Father Keneally put it, this philosophy maintains that there is in fact an objective moral order within the range of human intelligence to which human societies are bound in conscience and upon which the happiness personal, national and the eminent English jurist Sir William Blackstone summed up the natural and its relation to happiness as follows. This is the foundation of what we call ethics, natural law, demonstrating that this or that action tends to man's real happiness, and therefore very justly concluding that the performance of it is a part of the or, on the other hand, that this or that action is the destruction of man's real happiness, and therefore that the law of nature forbids it. Without using the terminology of natural law, psychologist Leonard Carmichael indicated how an objective, absolute ethic can be established on scientific methods based upon biological and psychological. Yeah, gonna need a bigger ukulele. Because man has an unchanging and an age-old, genetically determined anatomical, physiological, and psychological makeup, there is reason to believe that at least some of the values that he had have been discovered, have emerged as human individuals have lived together for thousands of years in societies. Is there any reason to suggest that these values, once identified and tested, may not be thought of as essentially fixed and unchanged? For example, the wanton murder of one adult by another is a purely personal person once it is recognized as a general wrong, likely always to be so recognized. Such a murder has disadvantageous individual and social effects. Or, to take a milder example from aesthetics, man is always likely to recognize in a special way the balance of three colors because he is especially eyes. One common philosophic objection to natural law ethics is that it identifies the realism of fact and value. For purposes of our brief discussion, John Wilde's reply will suffice. In answer, we may point out that their natural law view identifies value not with existence, rather with the fulfillment of tendencies determined by the structure of the existing entity. Furthermore, it identifies evil not with non-existence, but rather a mode of existence. Natural are thwarted and deprived of realization. Young plant who are withering for lack of light, not non-existent. Exists, but in an unhealthy or privative. Another word, privation. That's the privative mode. The lame man is not non-existent. He exists, but with a natural power partially realized. Metaphysical objection is based upon the common assumption that existence is fully finished, complete. But what is good is the fulfillment of being. After stating that ethics, for man as for any other entity, are determined by investigating verifiable existence of that entity, Wilde asks a question crucial to non-theological ethics. Why are such principles felt to be binding on me? How do such universal tendencies of human nature become incorporated into a person's subjective value scale? Because factual needs which underlie the whole procedure are common to man. The values founded on them are universal. Hence, if I made no mistake in my indential of human nature, I understand myself, I must exemplify the tendency, must feel it subjectively, as an imperative urge to act. David Hume is the philosopher supposed by modern philosophers to have effectively demolished the theory of natural law. Hume's demolition was the raising of an alleged fact-value dichotomy, thus debarring the inference of value from fact, and his view that reason is and can only be a slave to the passions. In short, in contrast to the natural, man's reason can discover the proper ends for man to follow. Hume held that only the emotions can ultimately set man, and that reason's place is as the technician and handmaiden. Here, Hume has been followed by modern social scientists since Max Weber. According to the view, people's emotions are presumed primary and unanalyzable given. Okay, good. They are getting to the objection to taking Hume's guillotine as a you can't infer value from fact alone, as in like from material reality alone. You do need value, but you can have objectively true value thing. You know, like you can't just look at the world and figure out, oh yeah, it's wrong, because you don't know. You don't have the value thing. You gotta look at. You need to make some specific value axiom. Okay. Professor Hesselberg has shown, however, that Hume, in the course of his own discussions, held to reintroduce a natural conception of social philosophy, particularly into his theory of justice, thus illustrating Bib of Etienne Gilson. Natural law always buries its under. For Hume, in Hesselberg's words, recognized and accepted that the social order, indispensable prerequisite to man's well-being and happiness, and that this is a statement of fact. Social order, therefore, must be obtained by man. Hesselberg continues, but a social order is not possible unless man is able to see what its advantages are, so consider those norms of conduct which are establishment and preservation, namely, respect for another person and for his rightful possessions, substance of justice. Justice is the product of reason, not the passions, and justice is the necessary support of social order. Social order, happiness. If this is so, forms of justice must control and regulate the passions, and not vice versa. Hesselberg concludes that thus Hume's supremacy of the passions is utterly untenable, social and theory, and is compelled to reintroduce as a cognitive normative factor social relations. Indeed, in discussing justice and the importance of the rights of private property, Hume was compelled to write that reason can establish a nature provides a remedy judgment and understanding what is particular action. Short reason can be passions. We have seen from our discussion that the doctrine of natural law, the view that an objective ethic can be established, has had to face two powerful groups of enemies. Both aim to denigrate the power of man's reason to decide upon destiny. These are the fideists, who believe that ethics can only be given to man by supernatural revelation, and the skeptics believe that man must take his ethics from arbitrary whim or emotion. May sum up with Professor Grant's harsh but penetrating view of the strange contemporary alliance, those who doubt the capacity of the name of probably scientific in origin, and those who denigrate its capacity in the name of only necessary to study the thought of Occam, to see how ancient this strange alliance is. In Occam can be seen how philosophic nominalism, unable to face the question of practical certainty, solves it by the arbitrary hypothesis. The will detached from the intellect, as it must be, and seek certainty such arbitrary hypotheses. Interesting fact historically is that these two anti-rationalists, that of the skeptic and the Protestant revelationist, should originally have come from two Protestant dependence on revelation arose from a great pessimism about human nature. It immediately apprehended the values of the literal originate in a great optimism. Yet, after all, is not the dominating tradition a Protestantism has been transformed by pragmatic technology and liberal aspiration. Natural law versus positive law. I'm going to give the point to my boys in the natural law camp, probably. You know how it is, we reckon. If, then, the natural law is discovered by reason from the basic inclination of humanity, absolute, immutable, and of universal validity places, follows that the natural law provides an objective set of ethical norms by which to gauge human action at any time. Natural law is, in essence, a profoundly radical, for it holds the existing status quo, might grossly violate natural up to the unsparing and light of realm of politics, state action. Natural law presents man with a set of norms may well be radically positive imposed by the state. At this point, we need only stress the existence of natural law, discoverable by reason, is a potentially powerful threat to the status quo and a standing reproach to the reign of blindly arbitrary state apparatus. In fact, legal principles of any society can be established very ultimately by following the tradition, custom, tribe, or community, by obeying the arbitrary ad hoc will of those who state apparatus, or by the use of man's reason covering the natural law. In short, by slavish conformity to custom, by arbitrary, by use of man's reason, essentially any possible ways establishing positive law. Here we may simply affirm that the latter method at once appropriate and the most potentially revolutionary given status quo. W. In our century, widespread ignorance of and scorn the very existence of the natural people's advocacy of legal structures, A or B, or to some blend of the two. This even holds for those who try to hew to a policy of individual. Thus, there are those libertarians who would say and uncritically common law fight its anti-libertarian. Others, like Henry Hazlitt, would scrap all constitutional limitations on government, rely solely on the majority will as expressed by the legislature. Neither group seems to understand the concept of a structure of rational to be used as a guidepost, shaping and reshaping whatever positive law may be. While natural law theory has often been used erroneously in defense of the political status quo, its radical and revolutionary implications were brilliantly understood by the great Catholic libertarian historian Lord Acton. Acton saw clearly that the deep flaw in the ancient and their later followers' conception of natural political philosophy, to identify politics and morals, and then to place team social moral agent in the. From Plato and Aristotle, states claimed supremacy in their view that morality was undistinguished from religion and politics from morals. In religion, morality, and politics, there was only one legislator and one authority. Acton added that the Stoics developed the correct non-state principles of natural political philosophy, then revived in the modern period by Grotius and his followers. From that time, it became possible to make politics and of conscience. The reaction of the state to this theoretical development, horror. When Cumberland and Pufendorf unfolded the true significance of Grotius' doctrine, every settled authority, every triumphant interest toiled aghast. It was manifest that all persons who had learned that political science is an affair of conscience rather than of might and must regard their adversaries as men without principle. Acton saw clearly that any set of objective moral principles rooted in the of man must inevitably come into conflict with custom and with positive law. Acton, such an irrepressible conflict, essential attribute of classical liberalism wishes for what ought to be, irrespective of what is. As Himmelfarb writes about, past was allowed no authority except as it happened to morality. Take seriously this theory of history. Give precedence what ought to be over what is admitted, virtually to revolution and permanence. And so, for Acton, individual armed with natural, then in a firm position from which to criticize to hold them up to the strong and harsh light of reason. Even the far less politically oriented John Wilde has trenchantly described the inherently radical nature of natural law. The philosophy of natural law defends the rational of the human individual and his right and criticized by word and deed any existent structure in terms of those universal moral principles can be apprehended by the individual intellect alone. If the very idea of natural is essentially radical and deeply critical of existing political institutions, then how has natural law become generally classified as conservative? Professor Parthamos considers natural conservative because its principles are universal, fixed, and immutable, and hence are absolute principles of justice. Very true, but how does fixed principle imply conservatism? On the contrary, the fact that natural law theorists derive from the very nature of a fixed structure of independent of time and place, or of habit or authority, makes that law a mighty force of radical change. The only exception would be the surely rare case positive law happens to coincide every aspect with the natural law as discerned by human. Ideational theory can be in existing satisfactorily, even when those institutions reflect the values of that ideology. Perfect nature of the ideology's ideal and inevitable negation of the institution, a gap between the ideal becomes a standard by which to criticize the institution, much to the embarrassment of those who believe the ideal, yet still wish to defend the institution. Hence, any theory of natural law as a set of currently no. Fascinating. Natural law and natural rights. As we have indicated, the great failing of natural law theory, from Plato and Aristotle to the Thomists and down to Leo Strauss and his followers in the present day, is to have been profoundly statist rather than individualist. This classical natural law theory placed the locus on of the good and of the virtuous action in the state. Individuals strictly subordinated to state control. Thus, from Aristotle's correct dictum that man is a social animal, that his nature is best fitted for social cooperation, classicists illegitimately to a virtual identification of society and the state, and thence to the state as the major locus of virtuous action, was in contrast the levellers, and particularly John Locke in 17th century England, transformed classical natural theory grounded on methodological and hence political individualism. From the Lockean emphasis on the individual as the unit of action, as the entity who thinks, feels, chooses, stemmed his conception of natural in politics as establishing the natural rights of each individual. It was the Lockean individualist tradition that profoundly influenced the later American Revolution and the dominant tradition of libertarian political thought. Revolutionary new nation. My mouth is starting to hurt. Man, ugh. It is the tradition of natural rights libertarianism, on which the present volume attempts to. Locke celebrated Locke's celebrated Second Treatise of Government, certainly one of the first systematic elaborations of libertarian individualistic natural rights theory. So many big words all in a row. Indeed, the similarity of Locke's view and the theory set forth below will become evident from the following passage. Every man has a property in his own person. This nobody has any right to but himself. The labor of his body and the work of his hands we are properly his. Whatsoever then he removed out of the state that nature hath provided and left it in, he hath mixed his labor with, and joined to it something that is his own, and thereby makes it his property. It being by him removed from the common state nature placed it in, it hath by this labor something annexed that excludes the common right of other men. For this labor, being the unquestionable property of the laborer, no man but he have a right that to what that is once joined. He that is nourished by the acorns picked up under an oak, the apples he gathered from the trees of the wood, has certainly appropriated them to himself. Nobody can deny but the nourishment. I ask then, when did they begin to be his? And 'tis plain, if the first gathering made them not his, nothing else could. That labor put a distinction between them in common, that added something to them more than nature, one mother of all, had done. And so they become his private right. And will any one say he had no right to those acorns or apples thus appropriated, because he had not the consent of all mankind to make them? If such a as that was necessary, man had starved, standing God had given him. He in commons remains so by compact that is the taking part of common and removing it out of the state of nature, which begins the property, without which common is of no use. It should not be surprising that Locke's natural rights theory, historians of politics have shown, was riddled with contradictions. After all, the pioneers of any science are bound to suffer from inaccuracies and lacunae that will be corrected by those that come after them. Let's check out the word lacunae. Gaps. Good word. I'm gonna slump down. Yeah. I'm not feeling like sitting all the way up. Where was I? Lacunae. Divergences from Locke in present work are only surprising to steeped in the unfortunate modern fact that has virtually abolished constructive political philosophy in favor of antiquarian interest. In fact, libertarian natural rights theory continued to be expanded and purified after its culmination in the 18th century. Herbert Spencer, Lysander A myriad of post-Locke and post-Leveler natural rights theories made clear their view these rights stem from the man and of the world around him. A few strikingly worded examples. 19th century German-American theorist Francis Lieber, in his earlier work, An Libertarian Treatise, wrote, "The law of nature, or natural law, the body of rights, which flows from the essential nature." Prominent 19th century American Unitarian minister William Ellery Channing, "All men have the same rational nature, same power of conscience, and all are equally made for indefinite improvement of the divine faculty, happiness to be found in their virtuous." And Theodore Woolsey, one of the last of the systematic natural rights theorists, 19th century. Natural rights are those which by fair deduction present physical, moral, social, religious characteristics of man must be invested with in order to fulfill the ends to which his nature calls. If, as we have seen, as we have seen, natural law is essentially a revolutionary theory, then so a fortiori is its individualist natural rights branch. As the 19th century American natural rights theorist Elisha P. Hurlbut put it, "The laws shall be merely declaratory of natural rights, natural wrongs, and whatever is indifferent to the laws of nature shall be left unnoticed by human legislation, and legal tyranny arises whenever there is a departure from this principle." A notable example of the revolutionary natural right is, of course, the American Revolution, which was grounded in a radically revolutionary development of Lockean theory during the 18th century. Famous words of the Declaration of Independence, as Jefferson himself made clear, were enunciating nothing new, but were simply a brilliantly written held by the American. We hold these views to be self-evident that all men are created equal, they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and happiness. The more common triad at the time was life, liberty, and property. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it. Particularly striking is the flaming prose of the great abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison, applying natural rights theory in a revolutionary way to the question of slavery. The right to enjoy liberty is inalienable. Every man has a right to his own body, product of his own labor, protection of law. That all these laws which are now in force admitting the right of slavery are, therefore, before God, utterly null and void, and therefore they ought instantly to be abrogated. Ooh, abrogation. We shall be speaking throughout this work of rights, in particular the rights of individuals to property in their persons and in material objects. How do we define rights? Right has cogently and trenchantly been defined by Professor Sadowski. Why are you yawning so much? God darn. When we say that one has the right to do certain things, we mean this and only this: that it would be immoral for another, alone or in combination, to stop him from doing this by the use of physical force or the threat thereof. Not mean that any use a man makes of his property set forth is necessarily a moral use. Um, Sadowski's definition highlights the crucial distinction we shall throughout this work, right, and the moral or immorality of his exercise of that right. Will contend that it is a man's right to do person, right, not to be molested or interfered with by violence from exercising that right. But what may be the moral or immoral exercising that right is a question of personal ethics rather than is concerned solely with the matter of and of the proper and improper exercise of physical violence in conditions. The importance of this crucial distinction cannot be overemphasized. Or, as Elisha Hurlbut concisely put it, the exercise of a faculty by an individual is its only use. The manner of its exercise is one thing. That involves a question of morals. Right to its exercise is another. 5. The task of political. It is not the intention of this book to expound or defend at length the of natural law, or to elaborate a natural law ethic for the personal morality of man. The intention is to set forth a social ethic of liberty, i.e., elaborate that subset of the natural law that develops the concept of natural rights, and it deals with the proper sphere of politics, i.e., with violence and non-violence as modes of interpersonal relations. In short, to set forth a political philosophy. In our view, the major task of political science, or better, political philosophy, is to construct the edifice of natural pertinent to the political. That this task has been almost completely neglected in this century by political scientists is all too clear. Political science has either pursued a positivistic and scientific model building, vain imitation of the methodology and content of physical sciences, or it has engaged in purely empirical fact grubbing. Contemporary political scientists believes that he can avoid the necessity of moral judgment, that he can help frame public policy without committing himself to any ethical position, and yet as soon as anyone makes any policy suggestion, however narrow or limited, ethical judgment, sound or unsound, has willy-nilly been made. The difference between the political scientist and the political philosopher is that the scientist's judgments are overt, implicit, and therefore not subject to detailed scrutiny, and hence more likely to be unsound. Moreover, the avoidance of explicit ethical judgments leads political scientists to one overriding implicit value judgment, that in favor of the political status quo, as it happens to prevail in any given society. At the very least, his lack of a systematic political ethics precludes the political scientist persuading anyone of the value of any change from status quo. In the meanwhile, furthermore, present-day political philosophers really confine themselves, also in a vertebrate manner, to antiquarian descriptions, exegesis of the of other, long gone political philosophy. In so doing, they are evading the major task of the words of Thomas Thorson, the philosophic justification of value positions relative to. In order to advocate public policy, therefore, a system. Cameras would. That's better. Not much better. Green's Woolman. In order to advocate public policy, therefore, a system of social or political ethics must be constructed. For former centuries, this was the crucial task of political philosophy, but in the contemporary world, political theory, in the name of a spurious science, has cast out its ethical philosophy and has itself become barren as a guide to the aspiring citizen. The same course has been taken in each of the disciplines of sciences and of philosophy by abandoning the procedures of natural. Let us then cast out the hobgoblins of Vertfreiheit, or of positivism, of scientism. Ignoring the imperious demands of an arbitrary status quo, let us hammer out, hackneyed cliche though it may be, a natural law and natural right standard to which the wise and honest may repair. Specifically, let us seek to establish the political philosophy of liberty and of the proper sphere of law, property rights, and the state. This will be next time. This is it for the book today. That's where we're at. We'll be reading some of these. A couple of these. I'm not sure how far we'll get. But okay, we're moving to Daggerfall. I gotta switch over on this thing as well. Daggerfall. Alright, we're doing random quests for this. I think the King of Worms on me, right? One of our more brilliant, absolutely mad for something called haven't had much call. To visit Ryan Farmstead Graveyard. The shrine. Hmm. Damn.